Hi there, my name is Lucas Dwinell, and I'm going to make an argument for why an international firm should invest in Mexico. The main reason I believe a firm should invest in Mexico currently is because Mexico's economic situation has really improved. A few decades back, it was kind of seen as a much poorer, less illiterate country, and it was this way for a while. However, with the introduction of NAFTA, which is now known as the USMCA, the U.S. Mexican-Canada Agreement that was established under President Trump, which is basically NAFTA with a few additional provisions built in. Their trade has really kind of exploded, and because of this, they've been able to generate more wealth for the country overall. Um, so the level of education has risen. Now, these effects are kind of seen primarily in the Mexico City region, as most uh, developing and close to being post-developed countries are. They tend to be centralized. The benefits tend to be centralized in one region. As you know, Mexico is a very expansive country, so a lot of the outer lying areas still have crime issues, illiteracy issues. However, this is kind of slowly changing as the benefits seen from the trade agreement for Mexico starts to kind of spread out. An example of this is a recent initiative taken by the Mexican federal government known as Internet para Todos, or Internet for All, established under President Lopez Obrador, where they're trying to make connectivity to the internet a countrywide territorial um, thing. So they're able to get internet to further lying out regions than just Mexico City, which is obviously beneficial for all of its citizens, as the internet essentially transforms a lot of things very quickly. An example of the things that it has been able to transform is the introduction of fintech. So more people have access to apps, not necessarily American apps, but the equivalent of online banking, crypto exchange, international trading, things of that. Something that wouldn't necessarily be accessible to people unless they had the internet to provide those things for them. Um, Another major thing that they've started to kind of do is step away from publicly owned companies, which is pretty common, especially in the Central to South America region. Big example of this is the Brazilian company that runs the oil, which is owned by the state government. Venezuela is another example of that. They're starting to kind of sell those rights of production off, which is a bigger incentive for private companies to come in. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy when it comes to things like this. However, publicly owned companies tend, especially when it comes to things like oil and gas rights and things like that, tend to be pretty laden with corruption. Again, kind of see that with Brazil, with the car wash scandal that kind of ushered the most recent president into power. Um, and again, as NAFTA's introduced sort of this economic boom to the region, education has increased. Um, the population has become a lot more progressive in a lot of ways. Women's rights has become a much more frontal issue, especially in Mexico City. Now, this doesn't necessarily equate to economic growth, but there's an Economist article that argues since women make up 50% of the population, countries that typically either ignore them or actively oppress them tend to do worse in terms of stabilization, economic growth, and a wide range of metrics. With Mexico's population becoming more and more educated, their technology is coming increasingly more complicated. They have more patents that are being established every year. Um, their views on women has become much more open, and certain rights and certain privileges that before weren't necessarily guaranteed have become a much more sort of forefront of the conflict in the city. There are some downsides to investing in Mexico currently. like most developed countries, or countries that are on the course to becoming developed, their population is starting to shrink. They're not as bad as a lot of other countries. So Korea is kind of the prime example. So Mexico currently has a replacement rate of 2 children per couple, which essentially keeps the population stable. Korea, on the other hand, has 0.7 children per couple, which means they're going to have a very major issue when it comes to the population. Not too far down the road. You'll see this in other places such as China. The U.S. is experiencing it. A major region of the U.S. hasn't actually had an extreme negative growth. Is due to the fact that immigration continues to kind of rise. The ebb and flow of immigration kind of keeps our population replacement rate stable. Um, whether or not you agree with that, that's just sort of the way the U.S. is handling at the moment. Mexico doesn't have that immigration replacement rate, at least not currently. It is kind of shifting in that way, as you see immigrants from Central America trying to enter the U.S. being turned back and kind of establishing themselves in Mexico. But overall, the replacement rate due to immigration is nothing compared to the U.S. It's probably not going to be changing anytime soon. Crime is an issue in certain areas. Uh, as an international firm, they would probably be placed in Mexico City, since that's kind of the hub of trade, capital, things like the government, things like that, the major area of population. So that would affect them a lot less. Crime tends to happen in the poorer rural areas of Mexico, and it can get really bad. There's certain areas that the federal government will not allow its employees to travel to. And then there's other areas where they can travel with certain restrictions, such as not traveling at night, not traveling alone, not taking certain taxis. So these are issues to consider when it comes to investing in Mexico. Another major issue that has kind of subsided a little bit is the corruption issue. The Mexican government is notorious for dealing with bribes and paybacks and kickbacks and things like that. That's starting to kind of change under the current president and administration. And as Mexicans' population becomes more educated, we'll probably see that start to subside as people become more literate, involved with current events, voting, things like that. Those issues tend to kind of be pushed to the side, or tend to subside. There will always be some corruption. Obviously, there's corruption in every country in the world, but as a population becomes more and more educated, more and more aware of what their politicians are doing and what they're saying, that issue tends to become kind of a less of an issue. Another issue that I mentioned, or another advantage that I mentioned earlier, is the introduction of internet across the country. Obviously, this is beneficial for both its citizens, but as well as a firm. So if a firm wants to wants to invest in Mexico, wants to build a plant or establish a franchise, or a joint venture, or however they want to handle it, the fact that most of its population is connected to the internet is a major boon for that firm. They're able to advertise on the internet. They're able to connect, find employees, things of that nature. And it may not, you can establish past Mexico City without taking any of the risks that you would, in terms of traveling and things like that. Overall, I think it'd be a great investment. Mexico, I believe personally, is kind of on the precipice of becoming a major developed or a major world power, easily within the next 50 years. As these other major countries, their populations begin to basically implode, and Mexico's either continues to stay stable or possibly even grow. Along with its educated workforce, it's plenty of ports. It's got 2 sides of the country are accessible to the sea, which helps with trade, international trade. It's got a major ally, or a major trading party, 2 major trading countries up north, Canada and the U.S. Both these things are going to help it kind of become more and more prosperous, as long as they can keep the corruption issue under control, as I said before, which I believe they will be able to as they become more educated, more literate, more connected to world events through the internet, things of that nature. They'll be able to kind of establish themselves as more and more of a global player. So if a firm were to invest in it now, There may be some disadvantages. They might have to deal with still corruption, still crime, things of that. But if they're able to find a niche to invest themselves in, to establish themselves in, kind of learn how to manage those issues for now, 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, I think it'll be a major boon for them as the country begins to become more prosperous, more educated, establishes more rights for its citizens, things of that nature. And that's why I believe a firm should invest in Mexico.